My fellow Americans, welcome to the Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing Shampoo, the 1975 Warren Beatty sex farce. I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson. Jim, in this movie, Warren Beatty wields his blow dryer like it's a gun or a phallic symbol. I remember when you used to have long, flowing, beautiful hair.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember that too.
yeah, did you ever own a blow dryer?
Actually, I did. And the first time I used one, you were involved in the story because we were seniors at Middlebury College.
Okay.
And I went down to Ben Franklin's or someplace
Okay.
in Middlebury and bought one, my first one, and I used it. And I came up to you after I used it and I said, "See, doesn't it make my hair look much better?" And you weren't buying it one bit. You were a total skeptic. How about you?
I actually don't remember that story. I had long hair my freshman year of college and then cut it in the summer of 1973 because it looked so terrible. I mean, it was like awful. Um, and by the time 70s wore along, my hair kind of disappeared, so there was not really much use for one. So I don't think I ever did own one. I don't.
Well, I
I
think probably people younger than us, which is almost everybody, may not realize that it was considered very unusual back then for a man to even think about blow drying his hair. It just wasn't a done thing for men.
I think during the 70s it actually was done for a while because guys, like Bobby Ewing on Dallas, they had these
Oh,
gorgeous
yeah.
heads of hair, and you just can't let that stuff dry, naturally.
Yeah.
Oh well. All right. Well, anyway, on to the movie. So we're doing something a little different over the next two movies. We're going to take a look at two films from 1975, which Netflix recently anointed as the greatest movie year in history. Our first movie, as you know, is Shampoo, which looks back at election night 1968. After that, we'll do Nashville, a country music film that looks forward to the 1980s and 1990s. I got the idea for this series because of the Netflix documentary Breakdown 1975, which makes the case that movies were as overtly political in the mid 1970s as they ever were. And although neither Shampoo or Nashville are about a US president, they do have a political subtext that we'll explore. Before we talk about the movie, I mean, you watch that documentary Breakdown 1975?
Yeah, I did. And I think its main point is that for all the bad things that were going on in the 70s, in and around 75, one positive result was a whole slew of fantastic movies. Gritty, realistic, dealing with politics and tough issues, and pulling no punches. Is that what you took from the documentary?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the movie's made by Morgan Neville. He's a well-known documentarian who made "Won't You Be My Neighbor," which is that documentary about Mr. Rogers, 20 Feet from Stardom, about backup singers on famous recorded songs, and Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain. So he's a legitimate, very good documentarian, but I think he bought off more than he can chew. The subject is just too big and there's too much ground to cover. I'm glad I watched it because it reminded me of all those great movies from the mid 70s. It was also a reminder that the 70s were really, really tumultuous time in America. And it wasn't just disco and leisure suits. I mean, it was some really, really rough times. So
Yeah, I think what he did well in the movie was he sort of described two baskets of stuff pretty well, cataloging all the issues that were going on at the time, from Watergate to the fall of Vietnam to the energy crisis to crime in the streets. And then on the other hand, he sort of enticed us all by reviewing a whole litany of the movies that came out. And there were some incredible movies that came out. We could spend the entire time today just listing them, so I won't try to. Um, so I think that was sort of one of the services that this documentary did. But you're right about biting off more than he could chew, because how do you really describe the 70s or any decade. It's kind of an artificial historian's demarcation line anyway.
Well, I mean, if he had done it as a 12-part documentary or something, that might have been more appropriate. But, it was just like movie, 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 issue, issue, issue. And there were a lot of issues. But the premise of the film seems to be that America is a very flawed place, and that because of the collapse of the studio system, a new generation of filmmakers was finally able to make films that expose those flaws. And I think that's a little bit crazy because Hollywood has always made message movies. I mean, think of The Grapes of Wrath, On the Waterfront, On the Beach. There was even a movie from the 1940s called Gentleman's Agreement about anti-Semitism in the town that I now live in, which is Darien, Connecticut. So I think what really happened is that America was demoralized in the 1970s from the war and Watergate, inflation, general breakdown of middle class values, and that dark and cynical movies captured the mood. In Hollywood, as everywhere else, market demand ultimately wins out. And somewhere around 1975, 76, the public got tired of despair and started watching more upbeat or escapist movies like Jaws, Rocky, and Star Wars, all of which were massive hits. So, there for
Yeah.
5 or 6 years, there was depression, depression, depression. And then all of a sudden it was like, I want to be happy again.
Yeah. And the people making those movies that are lauded in the documentary and the studios were just as interested in making money off of them as people that made movies before and after. I think where the documentary went awry was sort of in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
First 45 minutes, fine. But then toward the end, it became really preachy from sort of a leftist point of view, really disparaging to conservatives and conservative causes. Social activism was great if it was for a liberal cause, but if it was for a conservative cause, like questioning the busing for segregation purposes or anti-abortion, then all of a sudden activism was bad. So I just think it went off the rails. My recommendation is to people is that they should watch it. But then after 45 minutes, do one of two things. Either turn it off or turn your internal bullshit detector up really high and watch it till the very end.
I agree with all of that. And moving over to Shampoo. So, although Shampoo was released in 1975, it was set in 1968. This is a very specific time in American history. That was the year that Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated. There were race riots all across the country, with over 40 people were killed in those race riots. And there were massive protests against the Vietnam War. President Johnson made the shocking decision not to run for re-election. And then in the end, Richard Nixon won the election, beating then Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the Democrat, and Alabama Governor George Wallace, who carried 7 southern states. None of this is mentioned in the movie, and we can discuss that why later. But, 1968 still remains a touchstone for political turmoil in the country. And this is the year that this movie takes place.
Yeah, there's a bunch of books written about 1968 specifically, with a number of people calling it the worst year ever in modern American history.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We kind of discussed what's not in the movie, all the things we just discussed. But Jim, what is in the movie? What is this movie all about?
Well, it's a 1975 satirical comedy drama directed by Hal Ashby and starring and co-written by Warren Beatty. And as you said, set roughly over 24 hours on Election Day, 1968. It centers on George Roundy, played by Beatty, a charming but irresponsible Beverly Hills hairdresser and notorious womanizer. While dreaming of opening his own salon and struggling to secure financing, George spends his days juggling multiple romantic entanglements. These include girlfriend Jill, an aspiring actress, wealthy client Felicia Karpf, who's a dissatisfied housewife, and his ex-girlfriend Jackie, who is now the mistress of the very man that he needs to get financing from for his salon. That businessman is called Lester. As the day unfolds, George's carefully compartmentalized life begins to unravel. Several of his paramours and their own jilted, jealous, and horny partners are thrown together, at two very different election night parties, a Republican party and a wild counterculture party. Everyone is so busy at both parties, eyeing each other with suspicion and jealousy and lust, that virtually no attention is paid to who is actually winning the pivotal 68 election. In fact, while there is some great classic 60s music in the film, the real soundtrack of the movie is the election day and night commentary and updates that continually play in the background, and nobody is listening to it. Ultimately, George seems to realize the consequences of his promiscuity and the lack of a purpose driven life, and is left sad, forlorn, and pathetic as his various lady friends start making big decisions and plans of their own. And guess what? Those plans don't include him. He discovers that when you play musical beds, sooner or later, the music stops.
All right. Well, that is a very good summary. Thank you for that. This is actually very funny comedy, but in true 1970s style, it has a real bummer at the ending, right? When it
Right,
just
of
goes to
course.
show. Yeah. Given that the movie is not usually in discussion as one of the major films of the 1970s, I was surprised to find out that it was the third largest grossing movie of the year with a box office of 60 million. To be at the third biggest movie of the year is kind of a big deal. And I had no idea that Shampoo had done so well. It was beaten out only by Jaws, which ultimately earned $450 million, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And it just beat out the Rocky Horror Picture Show and Dog Day Afternoon. It was a critical success too, with critics such as Pauline Kael praising it highly. Nominated for 4 Academy Awards: Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Art Direction. Lee Grant won the Best Supporting Actress for her portrayal as the film's frustrated Hollywood housewife, Felicia. Jim, did you ever seen this movie before?
I think I did, but I can't remember exactly the circumstances, but I'm pretty sure I did. I'll have a more definitive answer for you when we do Nashville, because I
Yeah.
know I've never seen that. But
Okay.
it's interesting, Gary, that the top three films in terms of gross, and apropos of the documentary we just discussed, were all pretty gruesome in their own way kinds
Right.
of movies. I mean, Jaws and Cuckoo's Nest. So, and
Yeah.
this one.
Well, Jaws, of course, as I said, earned $450 million that year, versus Shampoo, which, as I said, was the third largest, very impressive, made a lot of money, but it was only 60. And when you have someone earning $450 million, that really wakes people up. And ever since then, that was the movie that changed everything in Hollywood. And they've been trying to create these mega hits, and that's why we have so many superhero movies these days. Warren Beatty was the producer of the movie. He hired the screenwriters, cast, and director, and even has a writing credit. He was a famous liberal activist in Hollywood, something like what George Clooney is today. He's always contended that there's a political message in this movie, which is why we're talking about it today. Of course, there's the message he thinks he's sending and the message he actually created. So, Jim, what do you think this movie is about? Let's first discuss what he's trying to accomplish.
Well, I think he was trying to match up the whoring, duplicity, and situational ethics of the main characters with that of Richard Nixon and his administration. As the film was being made and released, Nixon was being booted out, Vietnam was falling. And so, from Beatty's vantage point, and people like him, they believed they were being proven absolutely right on all the major issues that they took a stand on in the late 60s. And I think it's also saying that, maybe we should have paid more attention to who we were electing in 68, been less into ourselves and our own vanity and indulgences, and getting more involved in societal engagement.
Well, I could not figure out what the political dimension of this movie was. Although I knew it had to be there, so I dialed up my AI machine and had them search Warren Beatty quotes about politics and shampoo. Here's what he seems to be saying, thinking, if I can believe his own quotes. He assumes that the election of Nixon was a catastrophe and the end of 60s optimism, and that the Democrats allowed this to happen through indifference and self absorption. That's the point you just made. That's why no one's talking about any issues or even paying attention to the TV, even though it's election day. And Nixon and Agnew are all over the TV. There's no discussion about the war or race or anything important. Worse, all the characters, most of whom are presumed to be liberals, attend the fancy watch party that the Republicans are throwing. They don't really care if they're sucking up to the Jack Warden character, who's Lester the investor. Um, he's the guy that's throwing the parties, this Republican kind of a slime bag. Even though the movie made Beatty a lot of money, he was disappointed that the audiences only viewed it as a sex comedy. So he made sure that didn't happen a few years later when he remade Reds, the story about Jack Reed, the communist journalist, and the Russian Revolution of 1917. So
Showing his true stripes.
throwing his true stripes, yes. The heroes are the communists, yes.
But here's the problem with Beatty's desire of what people should have taken. We were alive and pretty engaged in 1968
Yeah.
in the election. We were 14, but we were precocious. Everybody was talking about the issues. What the hell does he mean, indifference?
Oh, I know. It's so ridiculous.
It was all politics all the time. We had debates in our high school classes. There were even in my little hometown, there were protests and counter protests. Everyone was focused on the issues. So this whole idea of if only people had been a little more engaged, they might have made a different decision in the 68 outcome. I just think that's a ridiculous theory.
No, of course. I mean, there was no more political year than 1968, and you're exactly right on that. All right. Well, what do you think it actually did accomplish? What do you? There was his subtext, and I came away with it with an entirely different idea of what the movie is really about.
Well, first of all, I don't think he accomplished, as I suggested, his goal. The background soundtrack of Election Day coverage and sound bites from Nixon that were running throughout with everyone oblivious to it, that came over to me more as a running joke than as any kind of, damning message or serious theme. I think the filmmakers kind of realized that. And toward the end, did you notice how in the final scene between the hairdresser and the businessman, they kind of try to play catch up with that by having Nixon's victory speech on and when the two of them were talking and
Yeah.
where Nixon was actually delivering
Yeah.
complete thoughts about how he was going to run the most transparent, honest administration in history,
Right.
and he was going to bring everyone together instead of dividing them,
Yeah.
and which anyone in 75 would laugh at or cry out over, depending on your perspective. So I think they kind of realized that they were being too coy and tried to play catch up about it.
Yeah. I think the movie is. You kind of got hint at this. So the movie says more about the Watergate obsessed 70s than 1968. Tom
Exactly.
Wolfe has famously noted that in the 70s, which he called the me decade, that was the time when the 1960s counterculture morals of focusing on your own immediate desires infiltrated the middle class society. And we see that here in Shampoo. All the bourgeois values of sacrifice and hard work are out, and immediate self gratification is in. So what Shampoo actually accomplished was exposing the 1970s as a morally corrupt decade based on the principles of the 60s, which Beatty supposedly finds so attractive.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this movie is this movie is made in the 70s and it's about the 70s.
Right.
It's not about the 60s, and that its fundamental flaw is that the device of trying to deliver those messages about self-indulgence and lack of concern about society, the device of trying to tie that to a 68 election when everybody was involved in politics and cared very much about all the issues. I think that's the fundamental flaw of the film. But
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, that aside, I thought this film had a lot of tremendously funny, bawdy, and hilarious bits in it.
Oh,
To
it was
me,
all, yeah, yeah.
it didn't interfere with the audience going experience. It just interfered with what Beatty rather pretentiously thought he was trying to do.
Oh no, it's a very, very funny movie. Absolutely. And as I said, it shows me, it told me a lot about how the debauched society had become in the mid 70s. But I'm with you. It doesn't, the politics didn't work for me either. Well, let's talk
Yeah,
about
I don't, well, one more thing about the 70s, because I don't totally buy this we decade of the 60s versus me decade of the 70s. There's a lot of things the me decade could mean. And what it didn't mean is what you would see in the 80s and beyond of total aggrandizing, crass materialism. A lot of it was inward looking. A lot of it was trying to find peace at the center, as the Quakers would say. It was not all crass. And I have to say that if the purveyors of the we decade in the 60s hadn't screwed things up so much, maybe we wouldn't have needed a me decade in the 70s to correct a lot of that crap.
all right.
I had to
Um,
get that off my chest.
okay. Well, let's talk about what we liked about the movie. What did you like?
Well, time flew by for me when I was watching it. It was quite entertaining in a bawdy sort of way. It was nice to watch an R-rated movie that's actually R-rated for the right reasons and not because somebody's smoking or there's flashing lights in it or one F-bomb is dropped. Though I have to say, I don't know about you, but if I were sitting in the movie theater with a date or a spouse and got my tub of popcorn and the lights came down and the first scene opens up, I would have been quite embarrassed, wouldn't you? Because it was
Well,
a
you
sex scene
Well, the first scene is you're right, is a sex scene. It's
in the
black.
dark.
It's
Yeah,
the screen is dark, and all you can hear are sounds which eventually turn out to be like people making love. And then slowly, and then the phone rings, and Warren Beatty picks it up, and his girlfriend is on the other line. So
right.
yeah, so
That's one thing I liked about it. How about you?
well, yes, I'll also say, so I'll go to the funny part. I'll agree with you. It's funny. This is actually a modern version of a restoration comedy, which is a genre of 17th century English theater. They had witty dialogue and repartee, sexual intrigue and immorality, and restoration comedies also portrayed marriage as an economic institution, and it included such stock characters as the charismatic libertine rake, the witty and independent heroine, and the foolish husband. And in fact, Beatty and the writer Robert Towne based the play loosely on The Country Wife, written by William Wycherley and first performed in 1675. In the original play, the protagonist spreads a rumor that he has accidentally been rendered impotent by his doctor, so that husbands will trust him and leave him alone with their wives, whom he then seduces. So even if the premise is 300 years old, it's still very funny. And what you didn't mention, Jim, is that the men in this movie believe that Warren Beatty is gay, and that so they think it's okay for him to be with their wives and girlfriends all the time without not worrying about it at all.
When in fact, he admits at one point that the whole reason he went into hairdressing was to be around women all day. So yeah,
Exactly.
I also enjoyed I enjoyed all the double entendres that you were referencing and thinking about, but I also enjoyed the touches of irony, intentional and unintentional in this movie. For one thing, just about everybody's hairdos done by the supposed virtuoso were awful, just awful, including George's own hair. I mean, maybe that's a sense of looking back at the styles of the 70s, but it was terrible. All the hairdos, maybe excepting Julie Christie's.
Well, I was going to talk about when what's accurate and not accurate. I was going to say that the 60s hairdos were accurate. The women had hair that looked like first of all, he made his girlfriend and his ex-girlfriend, their hair looked like a Barbra Streisand, parted down the middle and straight
Yeah,
down the sides. But his own hair is anachronistic. Guys didn't have hair like that. Even male hairdressers didn't have hair that was so lush and flowing all over the
You know,
place
that's
back in
the Bobby
1968.
Ewing hair. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
that
Bobby
this is
Ewing hair.
1968. You know, he's
Yeah.
dressed like he's his hair is like it's from 1975, and I bet you it's because he didn't want to cut his hair, you know. But even for the part, and he probably didn't thought that even if he did cut it, even if he was made himself look like a 1968 character, he wouldn't look as sexy as he does in
Yeah, yeah.
1975. So, um,
Further on the ironies, I was also saying ha 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 to myself to see liberal Hollywood taking part in all sorts of politically incorrect comments and behavior. And it was not done in a lampooning way. It was just they were doing it reflexively. Of course, all sorts of slurs and stereotypes for gays. George riding everywhere on a motorcycle without a helmet. Some drunk driving treated for laughs, which was done a lot in that period of time. Misogynistic comments, and the hair and the clothes and the drugs, and using the old and now very politically incorrect term for Down syndrome. So
oh
that was
yeah.
kind of fun. Yeah, that was kind of fun. Ha
All right.
ha
Well, now you've called out many of my favorite lines, which I'll now have to boulderize.
ha. Well, you can
Um,
do them anyway.
okay.
What
One
else
thing
did you like?
I like the soundtrack, and I think we should spend a minute talking about the music.
Sure.
You know, it uses pop hits from the late '60s to establish a nostalgic mood, much like American Graffiti had done just 2 years earlier. I mean, we got the Beach Boys, the Beatles, Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield. Um, Jim, I don't know if you know. First of all, there's our first reference to the Beatles,
Right.
right? Two
I
Beatles
have a
songs.
question for you about that.
Okay.
How do you think they got were able to play the records themselves or afford it? Is it because, do you think it could be because in those days they were not yet commoditized to the degree they were like when when I
Yes,
just
that's exactly right. I
yeah,
mean, the first use of popular records was made by in Easy Rider, which I just recently watched, by the way, for the first time. Easy
so did I.
Rider, you know, they have hit after hit after hit, great songs, and apparently they only paid about $1 million they paid more for the rights, but by 1975, even you could afford a Beatles song, and it hadn't they didn't realize yet how much they could commodify their records yet, and they were letting it go for a lot cheaper than they would now. Now, one Beatles song, I think it costs over $1 million. So,
Yeah, remember the big to do and Mad Men?
yeah, exactly.
Played one at the end, and
Hmm.
it was like half the budget for the whole show or something.
Yeah,
So I
I mean,
mean,
my personal belief is that I would bet you the Beatles let the Mad Men have it for considerably less, just because it was a very high status show. But
yeah, I have
um,
to say another thing about the music, though. Two other things. First of
okay,
all, it was used to great effect to make the points about the counterculture versus the establishment.
yeah.
Because guess what song was playing during the Republican Party? A Muzak version of Yesterday. So both parties played Beatles, but the establishment one played the Beatles' most establishment song and a Muzak version of it to boot. And then the counterculture party played the acid songs, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And and then my other comment is, I'm sorry to say this, the Paul Simon incidental music was just awful. It was just so drippy and and it was terrible. And unfortunately, it emerged whenever the movie tried to get serious and tried to have George get serious in a reflective mood or remorseful. Then that awful incidental music would come on. So I love Paul Simon, but his contribution was terrible.
Well, yes, there's a whole story about that too. I mean, Beatty apparently really wanted to have Paul Simon, and he hired him to do the music. He wrote the title song, but Beatty, when he heard the song, thought it made the character too superficial and one dimensional, so he didn't use it. Later, Simon included that song on the album Still Crazy After All These Years, and it's called Have a Good Time.
Hmm.
And you're right. His contribution, Simon's contribution, is negligible, but he gets a music credit, and he probably got that check too.
Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing that I know that you'll be interested in is that Beatty had a brief fling with Joni Mitchell right
Yes.
around this time, if you can believe that. And he asked her to write a song for the film, and but he ultimately rejected it, saying, "Good song, wrong movie." And that song is "Sweet Bird,"
Hmm.
uh, for the scene where Beatty's character watches Julie Christie's car leave at the end. It's a nod to the play "The Sweet Bird of Youth," and that song later appeared on the Hissing of Summer Lawns.
Hmm.
So I
Well,
know you know that song.
who didn't Warren Beatty have a fling with? That's my would be my question.
Oh, I know. Well, I looked up and I according to Wikipedia, he slept with at least 100 female celebrities, right? I mean, Carly Simon apparently
You're
wrote,
so vain.
That's all we want about him. I mean, yeah,
So
no,
what's really interesting is that the lesson that George the hairdresser learns at the end of the movie, it took Warren Beatty about 10 more years and about 100 more women to learn.
yeah. Well, he finally did get married. I mean, good
Oh,
for
I
him.
know, no, he did learn.
Yeah,
Um, one other thing I really liked, I got, and again, it wasn't intentional on the part of the movie makers. I actually got a vicarious thrill out of seeing people just ignore politics and
yeah.
go about their business. Today, everything is politics 24/7. You won't be friends with people because of their politics. You'll get divorced because of politics. It's all filtered through that lens. So, frankly, it was fun to see all the blowhard politicians and TV journalists just ignored, just plain ignored.
I no, I think you're right, and I wonder whether Beatty, if he thinks we're in a better space now than we were 50 years ago when politics wasn't top of mind every single second of the day.
Well, there's a happy medium somewhere. So,
Yeah, there's some. I mean,
mhm.
yes, we need to be engaged. We don't want to be indifferent. On the other hand, I mean, come on, got to sleep sometime,
And don't lose your tolerance for
and don't
different
lose your
opinions.
tolerance. Yeah. I'm just going to say the last thing I liked was I thought the writing was top notch.
Yeah.
The writer Robert Towne was on a hot streak in 1973. He'd written The Last Detail. In 1974, it was Chinatown. And then, of course, in 1975, he wrote Shampoo. He went on to write Days of Thunder and the Mission Impossible movies. I thought the dialogue was very sharp in these movies. I will also say that apparently it took Warren Beatty and Robert Towne conceived this movie actually even before 1968. They worked on it for 8 years and they couldn't get the script together and couldn't get the money together. But they eventually did. And there's a whole big dispute. I read this book. I mean, I'm in the process of reading this book called um, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls by Peter Biskind. It's all about the 70s and about detailing all these movies. And if you think that these Harvey Weinstein is uniquely gross, all these cool directors from Hal Ashby, Warren Beatty, Robert Towne, they all cheated on their wives. They slept with a million different people. They took drugs. I mean, it was just debauchery back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't know this movie was in development for so long, or the script. Um, and I still, based on our previous discussion about what it was trying to accomplish, I'm curious why Beatty wouldn't have set this on election night in 72.
yeah,
Maybe there was, because there wasn't any suspense about it, but he was huge for McGovern. He
yeah.
loved McGovern, and he got Joni Mitchell and all the other stars and celebrities together. They did one fundraiser after another. Whereas in 1968, I don't think Hollywood liberals were cared that much about Hubert Humphrey at all. They
Yeah.
had lost their love of their political life, Bobby Kennedy, tragically. So I'm wondering, it was a movie set in this about the 70s or made in the 70s, and it had more of a 70s theme and feel. They should have just made it about election 72 and have everyone ignoring that election day.
You might be right, although I think 1968 is a more famous year for political turmoil, and I think it probably wants to put a little distance between the period they're writing, the period it comes out, so that looking back a little ways, it would be like if someone made a movie now about 2016 when Trump was elected, and then was trying to say, well, see, you should have known better, 8 years ago. But the
Yeah,
interesting thing too is that Robert Town complained a lot that Beatty took a writing credit on this. And Beatty's response to that was, this is in the Biskin book. He says, there was no politics in there. I had to put it all in, all this thing, and it's like, he takes credit for making this movie political, so much so that he thinks he deserves the writing credit. And,
hmm.
so that was totally his idea to do it back then. All right, let's talk about what we didn't like. I don't have much, but
Well,
do you have anything?
well, yeah, I'll limit discussion about this, but I gotta say, I just didn't think Beatty was very good in the role. He was
Okay.
okay, he was fine, but I just think he's a better director and auteur than he is actor. And especially when he tried to get serious and remorseful, and in the last scene on the hilltop, he just wasn't believable to me. I'm sorry. I'll save the rest of that, for deeper discussion when we get to him. But
All right,
that's one thing I didn't like.
we're going to talk about the actors in next second. My comment also is about the Beatty character. Um, is that I didn't like that the character George was so handsome and charming in a way. I mean, that you kind of admire him. You can't help but root for him. And I know this wasn't his intention, but when someone is that charismatic, you tend to forget and forgive all that lying and cheating. I think if he had been a less handsome character, we might have been able to see through him more as the not exactly a villain, but as the shallow person that he is. But I just kept
Yeah.
throughout the movie, I found myself rooting for him and hoped that things would work out for him, even though he doesn't deserve it in the least.
Yeah. I have another, it's not really a dislike, but another comment that's kind of along those lines, and that is who the hell were the good guys in this movie?
Oh yeah.
Um, if you want to do a quote unquote political movie and send a message, that you think part of the responsibility for that is to show the audience a different way, a better way of being. But you really didn't get that. The culture clash that was presented in the film was two-dimensional: rich Republicans and rich hippies. Did you note the locale of the counterculture party? A huge mansion.
Yeah.
And did you notice that both parties had uniformed valets parking people's cars? So there was no, the good guys were absent. Maybe it was the parking attendants, or
Um,
maybe, just maybe, it was people that weren't mentioned in the movie, people like, our parents and others in middle America who, during all this period, whether it's the late 60s up through the mid 70s, got up every day, went to work, earned their keep, raised their kids,
yeah,
and tried to make the best life they could for their families. But you
right.
really didn't get any sense of what's the positive alternative path.
I completely agree with all of that. Okay, let's discuss the actors. So, as I said, Warren Beatty conceived the movie, invested $100 million of his own money, and got it made. I actually think his performance in this is great. Although I got the impression that he's barely acting. In real life, he's a famous Lothario, as we talked about. But where he's different from the character George is that George isn't very bright or ambitious, while Beatty is both.
Yeah.
George's attempt to get a loan shows that he doesn't know has no idea about how the business world works. He can't provide the most rudimentary business plan except to say that he does some socialite and he has this head or that head. By contrast, Beatty's one of the smartest money guys in Hollywood. His output of movies isn't all that big. He only made 23 movies in 55 years. And you compare that to Clint Eastwood, who's either starred and or directed or both about 75 movies over the same period. But even though the quantity isn't that big, he's still an important figure. He almost single-handedly was responsible for creating so-called New Hollywood in the late 1960s and 70s when he produced and starred in Bonnie and Clyde. And that was a huge hit that transformed the rules about who got to make movies and what they should be about. So I think he was, he's a big important person. I think in the movie, I agree with you, he's not a very good actor, but he's not required to act very much in this movie
Right.
because he's just
Yeah.
being himself. And even when uh we're supposed to feel sorry for him and he's lost, I think that's probably a decent bit of acting there. But I wouldn't, he's not a huge, I agree with you, he's not a very good actor and he's never won an Academy Award. And
Not for acting, but for directing.
but for
And
directing and probably for producing too, I wouldn't be surprised. I didn't look.
yeah, I think he just certainly deserves credit for longevity. He was
Mhm.
a star and he became a star in 61 with Splendor in the Grass. He's 88 years old now. Um, I also give him credit, and I'm not the first one to say this, but he did for male hairdressers what Baryshnikov did for male ballet dancers. He showed that heterosexuals really do exist in both fields. Um, back when Arnold Schwarzenegger was on the rise for governor, there was talk that maybe the Democrats should put up Beatty as the Democrat alternative. I think Beatty's a smart guy, probably knew his limits, and that wasn't for him. So I don't think he's bad in this movie at all. I think he's acceptable. Um, it's too bad that he's also remembered for one of the biggest embarrassments in the Academy Award shows of all time when he and Faye Dunaway participated in announcing the wrong picture for Best Picture, not La La Land, but Moonlight. Remember that?
Oh, of course I remember that. That was one of
Yeah,
the greatest nights of my life.
yeah.
It was so hilariously ridiculous.
So he's a
Um,
fixture. He's been around for forever, and all
well, the thing
power to
about him
him.
is too, he's not really a movie star as much as he's a movie maker.
Right.
I mean, somewhere along the line, he realized that he could make more money if he makes the movie. And it's uh, and he's very anal and very he controls these movies. And poor Hal Ashby, who, is a little bit of, considers himself an auteur. I mean, him and Robert Town were, Beatty and Robert Town were pushing Ashby around all over the place. This wasn't really his movie at all. I mean, he's just hired to point the camera and shoot. All right, what about Julie Christie? She plays Beatty's ex-girlfriend in Possible True Love. What do you think about her?
Well, she's a beautiful woman in this movie,
Yeah.
um, and I thought she was pretty good. She had to show quite a bit of range, playing an obscene drunk, doing wild pretend sex on the floor, unless that was a body double. She's another one who's had real life practice with Beatty on that score. Um, how she sympathetically but firmly rejected George in the end. She's an Oscar winner for the movie Darling. She's 85 years old today. I thought she was good.
Yeah, I thought she was fine. I mean, you mentioned that she and Beatty had a long-term relationship on and off. They broke up just before they started filming this, and you got to hand it to Warren Beatty. He's one of these guys who, whenever he breaks up with a woman, they still remain friends. I mean, that is not that easy to do. But he doesn't really care if someone breaks up with him. So what, but I don't think she quite works for the part though, because she's just too beautiful and too smart. to be desperate to hang on to her sugar daddy like Lester. She's like a 19th century courtesan, but I don't think that job existed back in 1968. As I said, it came from a play that was 300 years old, and her role in that, she doesn't have any job. All she does is like live off her sugar daddy. It just seems like anachronistic.
Yeah, she seems too classy for that
Yeah, I know.
in her demeanor and her look. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
everything
You're
about
right.
her is anyway. Um, Goldie Hawn plays Beatty's official girlfriend, Jill, which I can't imagine a more meaningless role to have than Warren Beatty's official girlfriend.
Well,
Um,
she played the sort of the goofy blonde. I
right.
was really worried at first about both about her and the movie because their first scenes together I thought were really awkward. No rapport at all in terms of dialogue. But she got better. She's 80 years old now, and she has the same hairdo today that she had when she was 20, and the
Not the
same
same
color of
face,
hair
though.
too. Right. Um, but isn't it nice to talk about a movie where most of the main cast is still alive?
I know. It's
That
great.
doesn't, we don't get to do that very often.
Yeah, she was a big, I mean, do you remember her from Laugh-In?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she was a
Oh,
big
yeah.
star in the 1970s, playing young, innocent, sweet girlfriend, which is also her role here. I think she's perfect in the part, and to the extent she's the only really honest person in this movie, and to the extent there's a truth teller in this swamp of lying and manipulative group of people, it's her. So, in a way,
Yeah.
it's just there's a hero, and it's not much of a hero. I think it's her. I mean, she's just like, I'm out of here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
She doesn't lie. She doesn't cheat. She, but and she's so because she's so innocent in a way. We mentioned Lee Grant as an Oscar winner. Did you think she deserved that?
Well, I'm not sure. It might have had something to do with the fact that she had been blacklisted for
Yeah,
many years,
yeah,
and Hollywood always has some sympathy for, those kind of their heroes or heroines regarding that. But I've always liked her. Speaking of people that are alive, she's still alive at age 100.
I know,
Um,
I
she
know.
she she won an Oscar for directing a documentary. She did a great turn as a murderer on Columbo in the 70s. But my favorite Lee Grant role was when she played the role of Miriam, Sharon Tate's mother-in-law, in what I consider to be the best so bad it's good movie of all time, The Valley of the Dolls.
Yeah,
I like her. I like her.
I like her too, and I think she looks great. I looked her up to see how old she was, and she was, and when I saw that she was born 100 years ago and still alive, I did the math very quickly, and she was 50 when she made this movie, and she looks great.
But there's one curious thing about her and her role, and I want to see if you noticed it. What happened to her?
Yeah,
Her character sort of disappeared toward the end of the film, and yet she won the Oscar for the role. There were reports that she almost quit. She had big arguments with Beatty, who I guess was added her to his arguing with list. Um, I'm wondering, I found myself wondering if any final scene or denouement with her was left on the cutting room floor.
yeah, I didn't know about that. I don't know. You're right. She does. She's last seen at the party where she's breaking up with her husband and saying that she's going to sue him. And although why she gets to sue him for having an affair when she's having an affair herself, I don't know. I mean, and she's more emotionally invested than Beatty than the husband is in Julie
Yeah.
Christie. So we're talking about the husband, who was played by Jack Warden. We've seen him already in two movies. He was the president in Being There, and he also played the Washington Post editor Harry Rosenfeld in All the President's Men. He was nominated for his role in Shampoo as Lester, the businessman, and Julie Christie's sugar daddy. Thoughts on him?
I liked him. He's just a good, reliable character actor, and nothing more, nothing less. I think he does scenes with sort of deadpan comedy. He's really good at those kind of
Yeah.
scenes. And his scenes were mostly all very enjoyable, especially when he was riding around in his Rolls Royce, listening to the same closing stock prices over and over again. And if some election news or Vietnam news came on the radio and intruded on that, he quickly switched the station to another station playing the stock prices again. So he was good at, I thought he was very good.
Yeah, I mean he's very reliable and always
Yeah.
a pleasure to see in these movies. And you kind of make this point. I mean, he's the only Republican in the group, but he seems to be Republican because that's the thing to do, and not for ideological reasons. He certainly doesn't have any ideological aversion to the counterculture, since he seeks to take advantage of the freewheeling sex at the young left-wing party later that night. So,
And
in
the
a
only
way.
guy at the party with big boxers, which guys then didn't wear. They do now.
Yeah. It's like no one really seems to have any kind of political belief in this movie. To the extent that Jack Warden is a Republican, it's probably just because he thinks it's gonna help him in his business. No one
Right.
really cares about
Right.
politics.
Yeah. I got to mention two other actors in the movie.
Okay.
This was Carrie Fisher's film debut.
Yep.
She played the daughter of Lee Grant, and she had one scene with Warren Beatty, and she was very good in it. Um, she started grilling Beatty over his sexual orientation, and then she offered him up some sex, but not before first offering him some lox, then offering him some chopped liver, and then finally some baked apples. It was hilarious. So I thought she was very good in that
All
scene.
right. Well, you've already stolen my best. This is my favorite scene in the movie when she was in it. Yeah, Carrie Fisher. And in the movie, she famously uh, can't stand her mother, and as it's probably not a lot of acting reach for her either, since she notoriously had a bad relationship with her mother,
Debbie Reynolds.
Debbie Reynolds. Yes. So no, she was hilarious in that movie, and many of the best lines in the movie were um, would be homophobically
Right.
coded these days.
Yeah.
So I can't use them when we get to best lines, but she was hilarious, and the
Well, I
movie.
wanted to mention her because there's the Star Wars fandom. Any mention of her might up our listenership a little
Yeah,
bit. So,
exactly.
just it's too bad there's no Star Trek to reference here.
Yeah,
I got to mention one other
yeah.
actor. The last screen appearance of Doris Packer, the older Republican dowager who introduced the senator at the
Yeah.
Republican Party. Fans of Leave It to Beaver will immediately recognize, and especially recognize, her voice for playing Beaver's principal, Mrs. Rayburn, for all 6 years of the Leave It to Beaver.
Okay. Good catch. All right, let's go to the history. This is a fictional movie set in 1968. So our usual question about how accurate the movie was to history should be, how accurate is it as social history that year? So, did you think this was real to 1968? We've kind of already talked about the politics, but
Yeah, no, I don't. I
I
don't.
mean,
And I
let's look at
think,
the rest of it.
yeah, I think it felt more like a 70s movie set in the early 70s than a 68 movie. I'm not sure the counterculture was that rich and into themselves in 68. They were very socially activated. And I'm not sure the Republican establishment types had yet adopted some of the worst habits and styles of the counterculture. And by 75, they had, and it was an ugly thing to see. So that goes back to my main point, that I think this would have been more coherent politically and socially and historically if it took place in the 70s, not the 60s.
The motorcycle lack of a motorcycle helmet was what made me gasp. It's like he's driving around without a helmet, and I was like, "Oh my God, I have that beautiful face, and you're not taking care of yourself." The other thing that I thought was accurate was that there was a Republican senator there at the party in
Yeah,
California. That was back
right.
in 1968 when you could have Republican senators in California.
That's right. That's exactly right.
All right. Favorite scenes. All right, you've already blown my favorite scene where Carrie Fisher is playing Lee Grant's teenage daughter and bluntly questions Beatty on whether he's sleeping with her mother. Um, she's so honest that she's the only one who sets him on her heels, but not for long. I mean, he can still perform later.
Yeah.
Do you have another? What other?
Well, I thought the election night party scene was
Yeah.
great from start
Okay.
to finish,
Yeah.
um, and the interspersion of the culture counterculture party, but especially the Republican Party. Um, Beatty arrives and there's autograph seekers out front, and one of them says, "Who's that?" And somebody else says, "Oh, it's nobody." The big smiling Richard Nixon poster with his shit-eating grin in his face, Agnew on the tube saying that a president can end the permissive attitude in the country, the main players eyeing each other across the room. Then at the table, there's an old, expressionless, befuddled Republican woman looking on while a drunk Felicia says she wants to do you know what to George, and she falls to her knees under the table. And all the while, the dialogue is full of double entendres. The rest of the group starts talking about hair. And so George says the hair has to be layered. Then he says of Lester, who would be his financial backer, "I've blown it with Lester." Then when he's about to leave, Lester says, "Yeah, go ahead." I mean, just one double entendre after another. And then, oh, somebody says, "Oh, it looks like they're about to call Illinois for Nixon," which the Illinois call was the call that actually won the election for Nixon, though it didn't happen until the next morning. And
Right.
somebody says, "Oh," and then they go on to talking about sex and oral sex and all that. So I just think that whole one double entendre, an image after another, was really good, right down to the end of where they have to leave the party for some reason, some kind of emergency evacuation. And so Lester brings down the champagne bucket and uses the back of the police car as the place where he sets the champagne bucket. It's all very witty and very funny.
Yeah, it's very funny. Yeah, I like the scene when he leaves the bank after he's been rejected for his loan. He's so upset that he takes off his jacket and throws it in the trash. Then he kicks the can. Then he takes the jacket out of the can and puts it on, and then throws the can across against the wall. Then he takes the jacket off again and throws it down. And then he finally ends his tantrum by putting the jacket on for good and driving his motorcycle away. I mean, that's just sort of 1 minute of physical comedy. I thought was very funny.
Yeah, and then I think it was right before he was going into the bank was another one of my sort of favorite scenes, and it was a snippet of a scene. But he was standing there about to go into the bank or whatever, and in the background there was an extra, and it was the most sexiest, woman in the whole movie in a tight mini skirt, just walking down the sidewalk, and on top of her head was a styrofoam hat with a Nixon Agnew bumper sticker pasted across the top. I just thought that was just awesome.
Um, there was only one serious scene in the movie. It's near the end when Warren Beatty goes into work and discovers that the owner's son just died in a car accident. Presumably, he was a soldier because he was on his way to Camp Pendleton. And this is
Yeah.
the first time that reality intruded on the farce that these people have made of their lives. And the contrast with the soldier's death and the frivolousness of the other characters is just striking. I mean, even George's character, even Warren Beatty's character, George, is jolted into seriousness and he runs off to propose to Julie Christie. And it just kind of exposes them all for like leading these idiotic lives.
Yeah, I didn't get too absorbed in that scene because I thought it was sort of surprising that the owner of the shop even had a son.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I couldn't figure that out either.
So
Yes, it's
they
like,
were
what are we talking
blasting,
about? I mean, because the owner was obviously gay,
yeah,
very
or
gay.
they were blasting through stereotypes again.
Yeah,
So
could have been adopted. Who knows?
yeah,
Or maybe there was two owners. I don't know. I thought about that, and I thought, well, regardless, someone is dead. and everyone is like shocked um, into some sort of self-revolution. What's it, revolution?
Yeah,
Are you done?
I'm done
Okay.
with scenes.
Okay. All right. Let's favorite lines.
All right. As much as I would find myself embarrassed by the opening scene, especially if I was sitting in the movie theater with a date. Um, I thought it was a great line when the bedboard keeps hitting the wall and
Oh
making
yeah.
noise, and that was the point of the scene. And Felicia didn't that was distracting her from her business, and it kept hitting the wall. And her line was, it says, "It really thumps." And I thought that was a sort of a great bawdy comedic line to open the movie with.
As I said, I can't use most of my favorite lines, but Warren Beatty says to Lester when he's being confronted for cheating on his wife and girlfriend and daughter, he says, "Have you ever listened to women talk, man? Do you? Because I do until it's running out of my ears. I mean, I'm on my feet all day long listening to women talk, and the only thing they only talk about one thing, how some guy screwed them over, and that's on their minds. That's all I ever hear about."
That was one of my favorites too,
Okay.
because first of all, it was ironic because that's why he went into that
Yeah,
business.
I
And he
know.
was getting his comeuppance.
I know because
The
this is
price to be paid was having to listen to them all day. And thank you, Gary, for using the word screwed instead of the word that was really used in that
yeah,
line.
yeah. Well, anything else? Well,
Yeah, I liked again the double entendre line of comedy. When George was making an excuse, I think to Felicia, as to why he had to leave her to go off to see his girlfriend who was having some kind of crisis. He said, "I think it has something to do with her pancreas." The movie was filled with lines like that and little touches.
yeah, yeah, that the dialogue between the two of them was very funny because,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see. George also, I don't know if it's the same conversation or not, but he says, face it, they know we're always trying to nail them and they don't like it. They like it and they don't like it. It's got nothing to do with you, Lester. It just happened.
Now remember, folks, these are lines from the movie. We're just being honest reporters here. We're not taking any particular delight or affirming any of these lines. Please
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah. Lester says, I just wish I knew what the hell I'm living for. You can lose it all, you know. I mean, you can lose it no matter who you are. What's the sense of having it all? Market went down 10 points last week. Goddamn, Lyndon Johnson. Maybe Nixon would better. What's the difference? They're all a bunch of jerks.
Yeah. And
That might be the summary of the movie for all I know.
And along those lines, one of my favorites, in fact, the last one I'll mention is at one point he says when he's reflecting on his life, "I just want a normal life like everyone else." But who in this movie had a normal life? And and when was a normal life presented
As an
as the
alternative, yeah.
alternative? Yeah. So I thought again that was sardonically funny and a little sad.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the relevance of comparisons to politics and society today.
Well, the basic issues of honesty or dishonesty, genuineness and artificiality in politics, in our society, in our personal lives. I think that's always relevant, can always be, treated relevantly in a good movie. How much should we live a life of materialism and hedonism? How much should we get socially involved in trying to fight for causes bigger than ourselves? I think these are all good issues to think about and to enjoy a comedic movie over.
Yeah, I mean the shallowness of the affluent middle class is always a relevant issue. If you have more money than you need and no values to ground you, you'll always end up frittering your life away. So I think that's the takeaway from the movie, and I that's we could make that same movie today, and it would be exactly the same.
Yeah.
All right, high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
What, and get fired? No way.
Yeah,
No way.
exactly.
It's just
That's
not
kind
a
of a dumb
school
question. I
movie.
probably should have left it off because it was so obvious, but whatever.
Yeah.
All right, well, grade for the movie.
Okay. This movie's not as heavy or laden with meaning and messages as it thinks it is. It's just fun, witty, satirical entertainment and a body movie, a legit classic, worth your time, especially if you lived through this era. Dragged down only by the passable acting of Warren Beatty, B plus.
Okay, I gave it an A minus. I liked it. I mean, regardless
So
of
did I.
the politics. So, yeah, not an A minus for political commentary, but an A minus for enjoyability, watchability, and just overall pleasure. And
Yep.
also, as I said, what it says about the 70s. I mean, I think it actually makes a very big point about the 70s. All right. As I said before, podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Please go and subscribe there. We already mentioned that our next movie is Nashville. Anything else, Jim?
No, I actually like country music. I have over the years. I'm not sure you did or do. Is that true?
I do like country music, yes.
Okay.
And in a way, this movie turned me on to country music,
Oh, cool.
even though it was denounced by real country music fans as being kind of fake. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But that's a little bit of the
A
analysis
teaser.
we'll be doing the next time we get together. So with that, I'll just say bye bye.
Take care.